This season is probably going to end pretty soon, so let's get ahead of it. Let's talk about Syracuse basketball in the transfer portal and what they can learn from the previous 2 years.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day, and we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on today's show, we are going to talk about Syracuse basketball in the transfer portal and try to learn from the mistakes that the Orange have made over the previous 2 years. We're going to go over the market for centers. We're going to talk about high major players versus mid-major players. And we're also going to talk about getting quality players in the transfer portal instead of a quantity of players. Today's episode is brought to you by the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Stay with us for the Armada Team of the Week later in the episode. So the basketball transfer portal window is going to open up in just a few weeks. It runs from March 24th to April 22nd. And Syracuse basketball over the previous 2 years has gotten 8 total transfers, 4 in each year. Let's talk about them, all right? 2023, you got J.J. Starling, Kyle Cuffe, Naheem McLeod, Chance Westry. 2024, you got Eddie Lampkin, Jyare Davis, Jaquan Carlos, and Lucas Taylor. Now, Adrian Autry, the head coach of Syracuse basketball, he is expected to return to the Orange next season per Field of 68's Jeff Goodman. I've already come to terms with accepting that, even though I don't agree with it. But because we know that that is just the reality, or expected to be the reality, the focus now has to be building the best possible roster for this upcoming season and just hope that Adrian Autry and this coaching staff can prove myself and many others wrong about his coaching abilities, right? I would happily be wrong, and I believe so would many of you who want Adrian Autry gone at the end of this season. But unfortunately, it's not happening. So let's just hope that he can prove us all wrong and build a great basketball team. The first lesson that I think we can all learn is getting quality players over a quantity of players. I'll put it in layman's terms. Get good players, not just a bunch of players. Sound fair enough? It's probably better to get 2 good players instead of 4 mediocre players. How about that? Hopefully you can understand what I am saying, all right? If not, feel free to ask a question in the comment section below and I will answer it for you. Every team, this is new from the NCAA heading into next season, 2025-26, is going to have 15 scholarship spots available for men's basketball. But I'm going to let you in on a little secret. You don't have to use all of them. You don't. It's that simple. In fact, the rule right now is 13 scholarship players. I don't think that Syracuse basketball is using all 13. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but last I checked, it was 12. And Peter Mastorovich was the 12th and final player that Syracuse gave a scholarship for this season. Having said that, the focus this offseason and in the portal needs to be getting quality players instead of a collection or a quantity of players. And even though that Syracuse basketball is probably going to have more money to spend, that's a good thing, right? In fact, they're playing in that Vegas NIL era tournament next year. That gives Syracuse an additional $1 million in NIL, just like every other team that's going to participate in it. Even though that they're probably going to increase their budget, you got to expect that there's going to be other schools around the country that are doing the exact same thing for this upcoming year. So, look, the elite big-time programs, they can do both. They can get a high quantity of elite players because they simply have bigger pockets, deeper pockets. But for Syracuse, they really can't do both, at least for right now. And hopefully maybe they can prove me wrong and get 5 transfers in the top 50 and spend a boatload of NIL money for it. But I'll believe it when I see it. You got to go after quality over quantity. Why is that the case? Well, let's think about the best transfer over the previous 2 years. It's J.J. Starling, and it's not even close. J.J. Starling was ranked the 5th overall rated transfer per 24/7 Sports. Has he necessarily provided the best return on investment, considering he was the 5th rated transfer available? I'm not entirely sure, but he has certainly been the best of the 8 that Syracuse basketball has gotten over the previous 2 years. And I've been critical of him. Sure. In fact, I was very critical of him in the last post-game show that I did after SMU. Why is he taking 10 3-pointers in a game? I don't know. The guy shoots less than 27% from the 3-point line. Makes no sense to me. But he's been better than Chance Westry, Naheem McLeod, and Kyle Cuffe combined. It's like not even close. His impact is better than all 3 of those players combined. And I think it would have been better, obviously, in hindsight, had Syracuse basketball spent the resources on maybe one player instead of getting a whole combination of Chance Westry, Kyle Cuffe, and Naheem McLeod. Now, it's a little bit difficult with Chance Westry because it's unfortunate what happened to him. It's mainly due to injury. He was looking really good ahead of the 2023-24 season. Then he got hurt, and since being hurt, we've seen him on the floor for just a few minutes, which was this past season, and people think he's a ghost. He was ranked 76th, by the way, in the transfer portal. So that's a high-rated portal player that they got in Chance Westry. It just didn't work out because he got hurt. But Naheem McLeod was at 323, and Kyle Cuffe was at 342 overall per 24/7 Sports. I think for this offseason, if you're Syracuse basketball, you got to avoid those types of transfers. Unless you are so sure that this player can really be a diamond in the rough, you already have limited resources. Save those resources to maybe throw in that extra amount of money that you need to go get a better player. That's why I'm saying it's better to get a quality player than Kyle Cuffe and Naheem McLeod. I'd rather a mediocre player over those 2. Because what's the return on investment on them? Not much. Not much at all. 2024. I'll put Eddie Lampkin in a separate category because Syracuse needed a starting center. They got a starting center. And I will talk about later on in the podcast a strategy for centers in the portal this upcoming season because I have an interesting take for you all that I would love to get your feedback on. So we'll save that for later in the podcast. But think of the money that Syracuse spent on getting these 3 guys. Jaquan Carlos, Jyare Davis, and Lucas Taylor. And think about where they were ranked in the transfer portal. Rankings aren't everything, but they do tell a pretty good story about how a player is going to typically perform. And Jyare Davis was ranked 130. Lucas Taylor was at 199. And Jaquan Carlos was at 213. What's the return on investment that you are getting on those players? Not much, right? I think Syracuse basketball would have been much better off. Instead of paying all 3 of them, you pool that money together and you go get one guy. They probably would have been a lot better. Overall, Syracuse basketball, in my opinion, is much better off chasing quality over a quantity of players. And what does that mean going forward? I'll tell you what it means. It means you're going to have a shortened bench. You're not going to be able to roll 8, 9 deep. But that's okay. I can live with that because remember 2024? Remember that when Syracuse basketball won 20 games, right? Probably the only reason why Adrian Autry has a job is because they won 20 games that first season with him. How many players were actually in the rotation? By the end of the year, it was like 6. Let me try to remember. It was Judah Mintz. It was J.J. Starling. It was Quadir Copeland, Malik Brown, Chris Bell, and Justin Taylor. That was it. And yet they won 20 games. Compared to this season where there's a lot of players that have played for Syracuse basketball. They have a quote-unquote deeper bench. But has it translated to wins? Absolutely not. Even if Donnie Freeman was healthy the whole year, and even if J.J. Starling is the whole year, they would not have matched 20 wins from a year ago. There's just no chance that would have happened. It is better, instead of going after lower-rated players in the portal, to save those resources and try to get one better player. I'd love to hear your take on this in the comment section below, whether you agree or disagree. Feel free to let me know in the comment section below. Because coming up, we're going to talk about a hotly debated topic. It's not really debated, actually. I shouldn't say debated. That's not the right word, but something that a lot of people have brought to my attention. We got to get high major players. No more mid-major players. All right. We're going to talk about that coming up next here on Locked On Syracuse. The Armada Team of the Week is brought to you by our friends at Nissan and the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Each week, our Locked On College basketball experts are picking one team that stands apart, from top-seeded stars to the unexpected upsets. These guys showcase the strength and sheer power needed to push their team forward. This week's Armada and clear-cut Team of the Week are the Houston Cougars. Since joining the Big 12 last season, the Cougars have gone a combined 33-4 in conference games, winning the regular season title by multiple games both years. When it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer, and that's exactly what the Houston Cougars have done here. It's clear that our Team of the Week is out here ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in the all-new Nissan Armada or any of Nissan's outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. High major transfers versus mid-major transfers. All else being equal, here's a question for you all, okay? Would you prefer a high major transfer or a mid-major transfer? Here's my thought on it, okay? If everything was equal, I would prefer a high major transfer. And the reason why I would prefer a high major transfer is because there's less of an adjustment and more of a predictability with a high major transfer versus someone who's coming from a mid-major school. If someone's coming from a mid-major school up to a program like Syracuse, not only are they going to have to learn how to play in a new conference like the ACC, but they're also going to be playing against better players. So there's less predictability with how that's going to go. But what if I told you that the school that a player comes from in the transfer portal really does not matter? Doesn't that kind of sound crazy to hear? But what if I told you that's really the case? Because I see a lot of discourse online about why the 2024 transfer class did not work. Now, Eddie Lampkin, he came from Colorado, but the other three transfers that Syracuse brought in all came from mid-major schools, right? Jaquan Carlos, Hofstra. Jyare Davis came from Delaware. Lucas Taylor came from Georgia State. And the reason why that those transfers have not worked out is because they came from those mid-major schools. I'm here to tell you right now that the school that they came from, it really does not matter. And I have a ton of facts to prove this, okay? Three factors really do matter. The actual player's talent, right? What is their ability? The fit. So how does a player fit into a new program versus how they fit into an old program? And finally, the coaching. Now, Syracuse is not getting rid of Adrian Autry, so we just got to hope that Adrian Autry and whatever transfer they bring in, he can coach them up, right? But those are really the three factors. Think about Syracuse basketball's 2023 transfer portal class and what schools those players came from. Now, J.J. Starling, he came from Notre Dame, and he hit. He hit, right? I mean, maybe he hasn't been perfect, but he hit. At least he's somewhat respectable. And he came from Notre Dame, right? That's high major. Cool. Chance Westry, he came from Auburn. And Chance Westry, I get it. He's dealt with injuries. It's a kind of a separate category with him. But he came from Auburn. It did not work out. Kyle Cuffe, he came from Kansas. It has not worked out. Naheem McLeod, he came from Florida State. It has not worked out. Those are 4 transfers. All of them came from high major schools, and only J.J. Starling panned out for Syracuse basketball. Furthermore, let's look around the country. Let's look around the country and talk about some of the top transfers from 2024 into this season, all right? These are all guys that came from mid-major programs. Chaz Lanier at Tennessee. He came from North Florida. Oh, by the way, Tennessee last year had another mid-major transfer on their roster. His name was Dalton Connect. He was a first-round draft pick of the LA Lakers, by the way. He was nearly traded for Mark Williams, but then that trade got, I guess there was something wrong with his physical or something like that. He's still with the Lakers, but he was a first-round pick and a promising player in the NBA. Yeah, he was with Tennessee, and the year before with Tennessee, I don't remember exactly what school he came from, but it was mid-major. Tucker DeVries at West Virginia. Where did he come from? He came from Drake. Zeke Mayo at Kansas. He came from South Dakota State. JT Toppin at Texas Tech. We saw him earlier this season. He was really good, right? Where did he come from? Oh, yeah, New Mexico. Danny Wolf at Michigan. Where did he come from? Yale. Known basketball powerhouse, Yale. Vladislav Golden at Michigan. Where did he come from? FAU. Malik Mack at Georgetown. A lot of Syracuse fans, including myself, wanted the Orange to get him in the transfer portal last year as an ideal Judah Mintz replacement. What school was he coming from? Harvard. And look, there's busts out there too. Right? There's busts. Sure. I mean, Jyare Davis at Arkansas hasn't been great. Aiden Mahaney at UConn has not been great. So there's busts, right? I'm not denying that. But guess what? High major transfers are not a guarantee either, even if they are highly rated. AJ Storr has been a complete disappointment for Kansas. He came from Wisconsin. I believe he was all Big Ten when he was at Wisconsin. Brandon Huntley Hatfield, he stinks. I don't know what happened to him, but he came from Louisville. He was a highly rated transfer to NC State, and he has been awful. Go ask Kenton Gibbs and Grayson Boone, the hosts of Locked On Wolfpack, what they have seen about Brandon Huntley Hatfield. And oh, by the way, we actually did a crossover podcast with them, and we talked about Brandon Huntley Hatfield. He was a high major transfer, didn't work out. Aaron Bradshaw hasn't really done much. Coleman Hawkins. Coleman Hawkins got paid $2 million by Kansas State. I believe he was transferring from Illinois. And he is shooting less than 40% from the field. And he's a big man. That has not worked out there. So high major transfers can also bust. The point being is this. I don't really care what school a player is coming from. It doesn't matter to me. I mean, was North Florida, so is that some elite basketball program where Chaz Lanier is, or Zeke Mayo, South Dakota State? A lot of schools actually will build by getting the best players from mid-major programs. Really, the 3 things that matter when getting a player in the transfer portal is this. What's the player's talent? What's the player's talent? The fit. So specifically for Syracuse, does he fit? Yeah, he might be really talented, but does he fit what Syracuse wants to do? And number 3, the coaching that the player receives. Those are the 3 things that matter. not really what school they came from. And I hope that Syracuse basketball going forward, to the heavy hitters, the big donors out there for Syracuse, I hope that this staff and this GM Alex Kline can do a better job of convincing people of that it doesn't matter necessarily what school these players are coming from, because they can be exceptionally talented. Again, if everything is equal, you would prefer the high major player. But most of the time, it's not all equal. Focus on a player's talent, focus on the fit for Syracuse, and focus on the coaching that the player receives. Not necessarily, did he come from a high major program or did he come from a mid-major program? I'd love to hear from you in the comments section below. What are your thoughts on what I just said about high major players versus mid-major transfers? Let me know in the comment section below, because coming up, we are going to talk about the market for centers, which I think has gotten way out of hand. So stick with me here on Locked On Syracuse. The center market in the transfer portal has gotten way out of hand. We learned a lot in Mike Waters' article about Syracuse's NIL trouble and their portal failures from last offseason. And one of the things that we learned in that article was Eddie Lampkin's NIL salary. Per his sources, it's $850,000. That's a lot of money. $850,000 for Eddie Lampkin. What if I told you that, considering the center market, $850,000 for Eddie Lampkin was actually pretty decent value, even at the time that they got him? Because the market for centers has gotten way out of hand. There was a player, I believe, by the name of Moussa Cisse that Syracuse had checked in on, and his asking price was over $1 million. According to this article, Moussa Cisse is a center that averages 6 points and 6 rebounds per game for his career, and he's asking for over $1 million. We also learned in the article from Mike Waters, Frank Anselem's NIL deal with Louisville. Frank Anselem is making $300,000, and he is Louisville's third-string center. Frank Anselem actually played for Syracuse, I believe, for a couple of years. He has been in college basketball for 5 seasons now total. That includes this one. His career high in points per game is 2.9, set with Georgia in 2023. Even for a program like Louisville, who has deep pockets, a lot of NIL money to spend, $300,000 on a third-string center and Frank Anselem, that's called lighting money on fire. That's lighting money on fire. That's like you are the Joker in Batman, and you have this pyramid of money, and you are putting gasoline on it and lighting it. That's what you are doing. That is insanity. Absolute insanity. And it leads me to this. If the market is pretty similar for centers to what it was a year ago, I think we all need to rethink our strategy with centers in the transfer portal. And we have to ask ourselves a very important question. Do centers provide a positive return on investment in the transfer portal? Meaning that you are going to pay X amount for this transfer, and he is going to deliver a positive result for you rather than a negative result. He is going to provide the value that you are looking for when you are paying said player. And here's my thought on this. The elite centers in the portal, unless they bust, unless they flame out, they are going to provide that return on investment, because you know why? They're elite. And they are also highly sought after. They are highly valuable. Centers are very valuable in college basketball for a reason. That's why they have such a crazy asking price. The elite ones are going to provide return on your investment unless, of course, they completely bust or flame out. It's possible that could happen, but you got to take your chances with an elite player. The middle tier centers, not really. Eddie Lampkin kind of falls in that boat of a middle tier center transfer portal edition a year ago. He's worth $850,000 according to the market. That's crazy. That's insane. That the fact that that's pretty decent value for where he is in the transfer portal and the position that he plays, $850,000. And the bottom tier centers are the absolute worst. They are the worst return on investment. $300,000 on a backup center or a third string center, absolutely ridiculous. Now, obviously, not every single depth center is going to be asking for that. But even if they're asking for a third less, even if they're asking for $100,000, that seems like too much. It just does. Think about it. Frank Anselem cost $300,000. Malik Mack at Georgetown, according to Mike Waters' article, went there for $400,000. And he's an above average guard. You're getting a much better return on investment with Malik Mack than you are with Frank Anselem. I'm telling you right now. And all it cost was an additional $100,000. That's it. It leads me to this. Look, Syracuse basketball, in all likelihood, is going to be in the market for a center this offseason. And why do you say? Why do I know this? Because, well, Eddie Lampkin and Naheem McLeod are out of eligibility. So the Orange, logically, are probably going to check out the center market, right? Here's my idea. And it might be a little crazy. I know. But here's my idea. Number one, pursue an elite level center because those guys are elite. And yeah, you're going to pay a high price for them, but guess what? They're going to provide a pretty hefty return for you as well. There's a reason why they're elite. There's a reason why they're highly sought after. Those are the guys that can be all conference. Those are the guys that can go 16-10 for a year and provide outstanding rim protection. Imagine if Syracuse basketball in the portal this offseason got Eddie Lampkin, except he can also play defense. That's the type of center that we're talking about, an elite level guy, a game-changing type center. Maybe it's a center like Maxime Renaud from Stanford that can shoot the three ball at a relatively decent level. Actually, if he was in the transfer portal for a little bit before Stanford was able to retain him. I would have loved if Syracuse basketball got him, but I don't believe they were even sniffing the market for him because he was probably going for too much. I think North Carolina was involved on him, if I recall that correctly. So if you pursue an elite level center and you don't get one because there's other schools out there that might pay that guy more, don't bother with one. That sounds nuts, right? Don't bother with the center? Really? That's crazy. How can you do that? As I adjust myself here for a moment, but that sounds nuts. But hear me out. Instead of loading up on a center, you get more quality wings and you get more quality guards because Syracuse basketball does not have a war chest of NIL money to play with. And once you get to the middle tier of centers, they are not really going to provide a positive return on investment. They're just not. It's bad business at that point. Now, if you had $1 bazillion to spend, go after a middle tier center if you strike out on the elite ones, because you know what? Who cares? Who cares, right? But that's just not the way we're operating, or at least it was last season. The center position is really the exception to the rule that we talked about in the beginning of this podcast, getting quality players over a quantity of players, because I'm basically saying it's better to get two guys for $400,000 than one $800,000 center. Except it's not really an exception to the rule. And let me tell you why. Because those players are better at their respective positions than that center is at his respective position. I think Malik Mack is a better guard than Eddie Lampkin is as a center. And even if you want to try to claim that it's relatively close, even if you want to give even a slight edge to Eddie Lampkin, well, Malik Mack costs half the price. Half. Because the center market has gotten way out of hand. And you can get better players than just one center. Except, of course, if you get an elite level center. That I am totally okay with. So yeah, if Syracuse decides to do that and not chase a center, well, they're going to have to play the season with small ball. But think of it this way. In 2024, when Naheem McLeod went down with injury halfway through the year, Malik Brown became the center and Justin Taylor became the power forward. And guess what? Syracuse basketball still managed to win 20 games that we all like to talk about. And they even pulled off an upset against North Carolina. They featured Armando Bacot, one of the best centers in the country. And this season, they have Eddie Lampkin, who's a capable big man in the ACC, and the team stinks. I'm not saying that the team stinks because of Eddie Lampkin. It's not really his fault. He has his faults, but he's not. If you go through the whole list of reasons why this season has failed, I don't even think he cracks the top 5. But the center position in the transfer portal is just ridiculous in the amount of money that these guys are getting. And unless you can get an elite level center, they are just not worth it based on what they can provide on the court. I would love to hear from you and your thoughts on the center market in the comments section below. I understand it might be controversial, but I'm just calling it like I see it. So feel free to chime in the comments section below. As far as what is coming up on the podcast in the future, tomorrow we got Poll Friday, where we are grading Syracuse basketball's returning players for this season, like JJ Starling and Chris Bell and Kyle Cuffe. Last week on Poll Friday, we did just the transfers. Now we're going to talk about the returning players. And then on Saturday, Syracuse basketball is at home. They are playing Virginia at 8 p.m. Eastern. It is the final regular season game of the season, and there will be a full post-game reaction podcast here on Locked On Syracuse. Thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen today. And for your second listen, you can check out the Locked On College Basketball podcast with Isaac Shade and Andy Patton. And it's March basketball now, and you can be the most informed college basketball fan right now. Find Locked On College Basketball on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Folks, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this podcast, be sure to hit that like button. If you really enjoy the podcast, be sure to hit subscribe. Tell all your friends about Locked On Syracuse so this channel can grow and reach all Syracuse Orange fans. And I will see you all again soon.